From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's coming up. K-State's Jeff Whitworth will be in to discuss our cold and wet conditions prevailing through the winter and the likely impact on field crop insects going into the spring. And Jeff as well will talk about a new online tool from K-State that you alfalfa growers can use to know when to start scouting for alfalfa weevils early this spring. Then from the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen reviews 3 new court rulings relevant to you agricultural producers. Among them, a decision on a key federal agency's ability to determine whom may serve on its advisory committees. And later on, with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven. Plus more right here on Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network, and welcome to Agriculture Today. And this winter that seems to have no end, a lot of folks are lamenting that. Is there a positive of sorts there in that, as comparatively harsh as this winter has been, as we look at the recent winters past, would this put a dent, if you will, in likely crop insect troubles for this coming growing season? We'll pose that question to our guest, crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth, K-State Research and Extension, and we will eventually narrow this down to a specific pest in alfalfa. We're all familiar with the alfalfa weevil. But your general thought here, Jeff, it's been cold persistently for a while. Is this relevant at all to insect pressure in the following growing season?
Good morning. It can be, but, let's go back to last summer, actually. The summer of 2018 was relatively dry, relatively hot up until the fall, and then it started raining, and we had a lot of moisture around the state. And hot temperatures are more detrimental to insects or arthropods than cold temperatures are, generally speaking. I know people don't really realize that, but most of the time, if you get much over 90, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, insects don't like it, so they'll start finding some cooler spot to go to. They're a lot like us. 72 to 80 degrees is just fine, but other than that, they start finding a cooler spot. So into the summer, the hot, dry conditions, we didn't have as many insect populations or problems as we usually do in the summer because of that, the hot, dry conditions. So anytime it's detrimental to our crops, it's generally detrimental to our insects also because they've come along together, evolved together, whatever you want to call it. But then we got into the fall, and we got a lot of moisture in the fall. Again, most of our insects overwinter in the soil. And one of the questions I get all the time is, all this moisture where the soil is saturated, is that going to kill the insects? It can, but if they're eggs, probably not. It's probably going to float the eggs off. Or if they're pupae, it's probably not going to. Now, if they're larvae or adults, if they're in the soil, it might, and especially if that flushes them out of their overwintering sites where they get up and they become available to the cold temperatures. That can be decimating to them also. But most of our insects around here will not be too bothered by too much moisture because they float. So they'll float from one place to another. But there again, if they get up and out of their overwintering site, that can be detrimental to their survival in the winter. And then we go into the winter and it's really cold, or it has been, and it's been icing and snowing and sleeting. And that's been relatively detrimental to insects, more so than if you just had snow. If you just have snow, it's insulating like it is to plants. But also, if you have really cold temperatures and it's dry, that can be detrimental to insects also. So generally speaking, the winter will reduce insect populations considerably, but they're able to rebound pretty quickly in the spring. If you'll recall, last spring, especially in April, we had it was the second or the third coldest April on record in history. And just as the cold weather hit, the alfalfa weevil eggs were starting to hatch. Now, alfalfa weevils overwinter as eggs primarily, but they can also overwinter as adults in the leaf litter. So if they overwintered as eggs, that cold weather wouldn't have bothered them. Or if they overwintered as adults, the cold weather wouldn't have bothered them. But just about that time, they had accumulated enough thermal units that the eggs were hatching, and they don't overwinter as larvae. So last year in 2018 in the spring in April, when we normally have a big hatch of alfalfa weevils, we saw a lot of them hatch out, and then they would just die because they're up in the terminals, and it would kill the larvae, but it didn't kill the eggs. So we'd have a cold spell 2 or 3 days. And when I say cold, it has to get down to the lower 20s for a period of time in order to be detrimental to most insects. And then it would warm up and some more eggs would hatch. And then we had another cold spell come through. So last spring, we had as few fields sprayed for alfalfa weevils as I've seen in the last 30 years. Normally we'll have at least 50 to 75% infested fields throughout Kansas. But last year we were hard-pressed to find a field that was 25% infested just because of the repeated cold spells that came through and kept killing the larvae as it hatched from the eggs.
The fluctuations in temperature.
Yes, the fluctuations. It allowed a few eggs to hatch and it killed those larvae. And so the growers kept finding black larvae. That's because they were dead. So there was very little alfalfa weevil spraying going on, okay? What happened then, because these fields weren't sprayed for alfalfa weevils, that allowed the pea aphids. The pea aphids would overwinter in the leaf litter where they weren't bothered by the cold weather, or they would migrate in from the south. Either way, we had massive pea aphid populations come in towards the last part of April, which normally are taken care of with the alfalfa weevil spraying. However, because we had all these aphids, we had a lot of beneficials build up. So there were a lot of lady beetles and green lacewings and aphid little wasps that parasitize aphids. So they quickly took care of the pea aphids. But because of that, going into the summer then, when we had other aphids come in, especially sugarcane aphids and green bugs and other things, there was a lot of beneficials out there that helped control these, so we didn't have as much of a problem with the other aphids as we normally do. And all that, I think, is attributed to the cold weather we had in April. Now, most of our insects in Kansas are adapted. Mm-hmm. So winter weather during the normal winter, i.e. January, February, March, December, is probably not going to affect them. It's once they break that winter dormancy, that's when if you get cold weather in the lower 20s for a couple of days, that's where it can affect the populations going into the spring and the summer. So I really have not ever seen winter weather reduce populations, but it can on the fringes going into the winter or coming out of the winter, depending upon the temperatures at that time. So
the story really is to be told from here forward, as opposed to what's happened, say, the last 5, 6, or 7 weeks.
Yes. We normally get some wheat growth in maybe mid-March, and some of our early season wheat pests are winter grain mites and things like that. So it's not going to affect those populations right now. They're still in their winter habitat sites, but we'll see what happens in the next month or 6 weeks. If we get some warm weather and these pests break dormancy, and then we get some really cold weather, that could help us out a lot as far as helping to control insect pests.
As you said, our experience with the suppression of alfalfa weevil favorably last year, if we could have a repeat, that would be tremendous for our growers. Speaking of which, wanted to pass this along. In cooperation with the Weather Data Library at K-State, a new tool has been developed on your part, Jeff, to help producers have a running idea of alfalfa weevil activity at their locales as a guidepost for treatment.
Yes, I think it's really a neat tool that everybody can use around the state. It's a computer tool. Just type in Kansas Mesonet, MESONET, I suppose there's a formal title to it, but that's all I do, and it brings it right up. And then you type in agriculture and go to degree days and hit alfalfa weevil, and it will pull you up, and you put in your area, and wherever there is a weather station nearest to you, the weather folks at K-State have made it available to tell you what the growing degree days or thermal unit accumulation, whatever you want to call them, are for that particular date for your particular location.
That's the catalyst for weevil activity?
Yes. All of these plants and cold-blooded insects are completely controlled by temperature as far as their development goes. So we developed a growing degree day system for growing plants. We've also done that for alfalfa weevil in this case. So you can tell after January 1st how many growing degree days have been accumulated for the alfalfa weevil for your location. And that's important when I say your location, because it can vary by a couple of weeks around the state, from south to north or east to west. Now, in our recommendations, the eggs will start hatching anywhere from 150 to 300 growing degree days, and that sounds like a lot, but sometimes these eggs are laid prior to January 1st. So once you get to 300 growing degree days or thermal units in your area, that's when you'll start seeing the little pinprick holes in your alfalfa in the terminals and a little bit of feeding on the leaves. That's when you need to get out and start scouting to see what the population is in your area. And they're only going to be feeding for 3 to 4 weeks, and they can totally decimate alfalfa plants in 3 or 4 days under the right conditions. So go to the MesoNet and watch for your area for the growing degree days, and once you get to 300, get out and start looking in your alfalfa field. That just saves you a little bit of time. Really and truly, you're not going to see much damage till it's accumulated that many thermal units in your area.
That's at mesonet.ksu.edu if you prefer the address, or as Jeff says, you can simply search for Kansas Mesonet, and it'll take you right to that page where there's this alfalfa weevil scouting tool and a whole wealth of other tools useful in your crop production as we roll on in eventually to the growing season here in Kansas. Jeff, we appreciate the comments. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
He is Jeff Whitworth, crop entomologist, K-State Research and Extension, and we'll return in a few moments with more for you on this Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, and glad to have you back, as we're also glad to have across the way once again Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen, to share more developments in the field of agricultural law today. And we've quite a smorgasbord of things that we'll get to today, Roger. Let's start with one, though, that is directly of an agricultural orientation, and this was an agricultural producer who was continuing to borrow money to operate while in the midst of bankruptcy proceedings, and things sort of went awry there.
Yeah, this is a Tennessee producer that filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is another form of reorganization bankruptcy. Normally we think when a farmer files reorganization bankruptcy, it's a Chapter 12 because of the favorable provisions that are in a 12, and it's tailored uniquely for farmers. But there are some instances where a farmer can't qualify, such as they've got too much debt and they blow past the debt level test, and so they have to look for an 11 or 13. The court doesn't tell us why he filed an 11. I'm just kind of surmising that that's probably one of the reasons. So he files an 11, and a month later then he seeks permission for what's called post-petition financing from an ag lender. He wants money to put a crop in the ground is what he wants to do. And so that he has to go through the court to do that. And to get that loan, he completes 2 documents. He completes a crop loan application and a farm list. He sends that to the lender. And on that, he lists his acreage that he's going to plant and the yearly rent that he's going to pay. He's going to rent a bunch of this land that he planned on farming for that year. And he listed well over 8,000 acres. Now, his past history was about 5,000 acres that he would farm. And so he's telling the lender, basically, I'm going to lease more land. I'm going to get my acreage up to 8,000 acres. And he gave some projections with respect to crop prices and his expenses. And so based on all that documentation, the lender made a $1.9 million, well, actually just real close to $2 million crop loan to him so he could put his crops in the ground.
Mm-hmm. But not long after, that Chapter 11 proceedings changed to a Chapter 7, and you need to make the distinction there as well.
Yeah, he switched to a Chapter 7. That's a liquidation bankruptcy. Things got even worse, and he defaults on his loan. And at the time he defaulted on that crop loan, the outstanding balance was right about $380,000. And so the bank sued, and this is a key point in the bankruptcy code. At this point in time, at the time he defaulted and filed a 7, that $380,000 left on the $2 million loan would have been discharged. He wouldn't have had to pay it. The ag lender came in here and said, look, that's a non-dischargeable loan because you filed false, misleading information with us to induce us to make the $2 million loan. You overrepresented your acres. You never had leases signed. You had no reasonable prospect that you would be able to sign leases that would allow you to farm 8,000 acres. He farmed 5,200. You underestimated your expenses. You overestimated crop prices. This is not reasonable based on history, based on the data that was available to you, and you impermissibly induced us to loan you that money, and therefore that $380,000 should not be discharged. You're going to have to pay it.
Of course, the producer contested that, and it wound up in court. What was the ruling initially?
The bankruptcy court was not happy with what he did. They said that he filed that documentation with the intent to deceive the lender. He made an attestation on it, and it had language on there that he signed saying that this was true, verifiable information. The bank relied on it. The court said that's a false statement. You lied, and that $380,000 is not dischargeable. He's on the hook for it. Now, the lender's going to have to find a way to collect it, so that may be by placing a lien on a home, some exempt assets, for example, that weren't in the bankruptcy. They may place a lien on the home. If he ever sells the home, he'll have to pay that off. They may garnish wages if he has non-farm wages. So there are things that they can do to eventually levy and execute judgment against him. But don't misrepresent items on documents filed with lenders, and that's a big temptation for farmers that are financially struggling. You got to play it straight, or you can have dire consequences.
Important lesson from a recent court ruling there. Moving it into the area of digital information now, there's a recent ruling as well. Access to digital information on the part of an executor of an estate, something rather new to a few folks anyway, in as far as the value of that digital information and why it might be hard to actually dig into that as an executor.
Yeah, this is obviously this is something new that the courts have had to struggle with and deal with over the past few years, and I've actually seen a couple of prominent cases the last 6 months on this, and this is the second one of those. And I think what it does is it points out to us that all of us, whether we're in ag or whether we're not in ag, all of us should have some sort of an estate plan put together, whether it's a basic will or a trust to dispose of assets if something would happen to us. For many people even that have an existing plan in place as well as everybody else, the new thing that we need to think about is how do we handle access to email accounts, digital assets that are stored in phones now, smartphones, the iPhones. We've got a lot of photographs that are in there. If we're doing online banking, online transactions, say we've got online an account with the propane company to come out and fill our propane tanks or diesel fuel or whatever it might be, we're doing a lot of transactions online.
It's more than just recreational information.
Right.
It's essential
this is
settling
business information, but it could be family information. It could be photographs, such as in this most recent case. It could be an email account. Who has access to that if a person unexpectedly dies? And that's what happened in this case. You had a 45-year-old individual that unexpectedly died in a tragic accident, and there's no one that he left designated as having access to the photographs, and these were family photographs stored in his iPhone. And Apple Company was not going to allow anybody to have access to that wasn't on the account. Well, the executor wants access to it, the executor of his estate, and the court struggles with this. And, of course, what the veiled message here is, legislature, you better deal with this. And this was New York, and they did find some statutory language in New York that they could hang a hook on and say, okay, this is close enough. We're going to give the executor of the estate the access to the iPhone account. But you don't want to get into court on these things. A previous case earlier this year involved an individual who died who had a Yahoo email account, and he was the only name on the account, and Yahoo would not open that account up for the surviving spouse to deal with banking transactions and everything else that he was doing through the email account. So this requires some standard language in wills and trusts. Figure out who you want to designate as having access to those types of online assets, digital assets, online accounts, those types of things, so that we can stay out of court and not have to go through that process and expend additional funds to get somebody access to it.
So if you have an older will that's been around for a while, go back and amend it, which is pretty straightforward and manageable.
We should be doing that anyway every couple of years, but this is something new. If you don't have a provision in an existing document, this is something new that you might want to think about. This needs to be in there.
Very good. Well, Roger, the last thing you bring to our attention today, you call a win for agriculture. Has to do with whether federal agencies, and in this particular case the Environmental Protection Agency, would have the latitude to prohibit recipients of financial grants from serving on advisory committees in service to that agency.
It seems pretty logical that you wouldn't want to have someone sitting on an advisory committee that is also receiving grant money from the same agency that you're on an advisory committee for. But that's the way it was under the Obama administration. Now, technically, that is unbelievably, that's not an ethical violation. They can do that. When the Trump administration came in and Secretary Pruitt was confirmed by the Senate, he looked at this and said, no, that's built-in bias into the system. And it was revealed that there was bias on the side against coal, on the war on coal that the previous administration had, and an expansive WOTUS rule, which is very important to agriculture, to get that straightened out. And so Secretary Pruitt issued a directive regarding membership in those federal advisory committees for EPA that said that no member of an EPA Federal Advisory Committee could be currently in receipt of EPA grants. Well, you can imagine some of those that were serving on committees and were getting grant money at the same time were upset about it. They sued, and the federal district court in D.C. just last week said, no, that's within the discretion of the secretary to have a rule like that. The prior secretary had a rule that allowed it. The current secretary said no, and the court said there are ethical concerns about this. While it's not a violation to have a person serve on an advisory committee that is receiving grant money, it certainly looks inappropriate. And the court said the current secretary was correct, current at that time, was correct in having this rule that removed those individuals from advisory committees.
That's where you see this as being helpful to agriculture in that the deck won't be necessarily stacked. The agency has the wherewithal to assure that does not happen.
I think it's not only helpful for agriculture, I think it's helpful for everything EPA touches. We don't want bias in some type of a government agency on either side of the issue. So let's just play it straight up. If you're receiving grant money, then stay off the scientific federal advisory committees for EPA.
And you address this in your latest blog, by the way. If folks would like to access that and all the other materials you collect, it's very easy to do so, Roger.
Right, and that can be accessed off my website, which is washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. Just go down the left-hand side and you'll find the Ag Law and Taxation blog. And there's also a little link there that a person can click on if they want an email notification of when I add a new blog post.
You really should check that out. washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. Always a pleasure. Thanks for coming over, Roger.
Thank you, Eric.
A professor of agricultural law and taxation at Washburn University and a regular guest here in the broadcast. That's Roger McEowen, and we'll return in a few moments on this Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Over now to today's agricultural news page and these headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the U.S.-China trade talks continue this week in Washington, and the president remains optimistic about success. Here's more from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
Trade negotiations between the United States and China are continuing this week in Washington.
It's going extremely well. Who knows what that means, because it only matters if we get it done, but we're very much working very closely with China and President Xi, who I respect a lot.
President Donald Trump spoke from the White House on Friday following U.S.-China trade talks in Beijing last week.
We're a lot closer than we ever were in this country with having a real trade deal. We're covering everything, all of the points that people have been talking about for years that said couldn't be done, whether it was theft or anything, the unfairness.
The president especially referred to tariffs.
If we could make the deal, it'd be my honor to remove them.
U.S. duties on $20 billion worth of Chinese imports are set to rise if no deal is reached by March 1st. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Also on the trade front, the European Commission has warned President Trump that bloc will step back on its commitment to buy more American soybeans if Trump, introduces punitive tariffs on European Union cars. The U.S. Commerce Department has delivered its guidance on whether car imports pose a threat to U.S. national security that would justify import taxes, giving the president 90 days to decide whether to impose them. European Commissioner Jean-Claude Juncker reacted to the news by saying that the president has promised him not to damage transatlantic trade with such measures during a summit in Washington last summer. Juncker said that he believes the president, quoting him, though, however, should he renege on that commitment, we will no longer feel bound by our commitments to buy more U.S. soy and liquid gas. Over the weekend, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that American authorities appear to have already concluded that European cars represent a national security threat. Merkel noted that if cars produced in BMW's largest factory in South Carolina, and those are, as she put it, suddenly a threat to the United States, that startles us. Meantime, escalating trade tensions are a key factor that's producing a slowing of global trade growth overall, according to the World Trade Organization. The latest update of the WTO's World Trade Outlook Indicator came in at 96 as of December 2018. That's the lowest mark for that index that analyzes several principal drivers of trade. A reading of above 100 represents baseline growth on par with the medium-term trend, while readings above or below represent faster or slower than trend global trade growth. Weakness in the overall index was attributed to steep declines in most component indices, including agricultural raw materials. Trade turmoil is the key issue weighing on global trade growth, according to the WTO. The almost across-the-board index declines, it says, should put policymakers on guard for a sharper slowdown should current trade tensions remain unresolved. Conversely, says the WTO, greater certainty and improvement in the policy environment could bring about a swift rebound in trade growth. And the USDA is highlighting its trade ties with Canada and Mexico at this year's Agricultural Outlook Forum. Once more, the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
U.S. relations with Canada and Mexico are in the spotlight this week at USDA's annual Agricultural Outlook Forum.
Mexico and Canada have been great consumers of U.S. ag products, and we enhanced the relationship that we had with them through NAFTA, and I think they can take comfort in that.
That was Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue, who spoke in North Carolina last week about the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA.
As I indicated, the steel and aluminum tariffs, we're working to remove those so we can have totally free, tariff-free trade relationships there for the pork industry, the poultry industry, the cheese, dairy in that effort. It will be a good deal to secure those markets for a foreseeable future.
Secretary Perdue will host Canadian Minister of Agriculture Lawrence McCauley and Mexican Secretary of Agriculture Victor Villalobos Arambula at the Agricultural Outlook Forum on Thursday. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
In other headlines today, farmers were more optimistic about the agricultural economy in January, but are still concerned about farmland values, according to the Purdue University CME Group Ag Economy Barometer. That barometer is based on 400 survey responses from agricultural producers, and it rebounded to 143 in January, up 16 points from December. The survey measured farmer sentiment after the announcement of the USDA's second round of the Market Facilitation Program payments and the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill. It appears that those two announcements provided a significant boost to producer sentiment regarding both current and future economic conditions, according to the director of Purdue's Center for Commercial Agriculture and a former K-State agricultural economist, Jim Mintert. He said the percentage expecting higher farmland values over the next 12 months declined from 17% to 13%, and producers expecting higher farmland values in 5 years from now declined 2 points to 48%. And the administrator of the USDA's Risk Management Agency, Martin Barbary, told the crop insurance industry this week that agents can discuss crop insurance for hemp with producers who are growing it, but must tell them there is no coverage at the present time. At the urging of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the 2018 Farm Bill removed hemp from the list of controlled drugs and said the USDA could help growers in a variety of ways, including developing crop insurance for the product. Barbary acknowledged that hemp is a hot topic, but he did not say when crop insurance for hemp might be available. He said RMA cannot really work on it until the Agricultural Marketing Service develops regulations for producing it. Each state must also pass hemp regulations. In the meantime, Barbary said the RMA is now busy implementing the changes to crop insurance that Congress included in the Farm Bill. One he expects to be popular will allow producers with enterprise units to include acreage in more than one county. The current RMA regulations allows producers to combine all of their acreage in one crop in one county, even if the acres are not contiguous, into one unit, which makes insurance coverage cheaper and reduces risk. Now producers will be able to add acreage in one additional county. Farmers will not, however, be able to combine acreage in two states because states have different crop insurance regulations. This is Agriculture Today, and we'll return shortly with more for you here on the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
What they liked more was when I put on my boots and grabbed my coat.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Right behind the door, the front door, hang 2 dog leashes we used when we had dogs. They have been hanging there for quite a while. The leather one is still very soft and pliable. It's a good one, and I've oiled it from time to time. It was a Christmas gift to the dogs a long time ago. The other leash is a strong red nylon leash with 2 tight knots on the leash. My wife placed the knots to help her to have the strength to hold the large dogs close to her on a short leash. All dogs knew the leashes, and all we had to do was look to the hook behind the door where they were hanging, and they knew they were going to take a walk. But what they all liked more was when I put on my boots, grabbed my coat and the truck keys. That is when they stood dancing at the door, even barking. and strong barks they had, as they were large dogs, German Shepherds and or Labradors. At times, we had 2 dogs. I emailed Guido to help me recall all the names of the dogs we have had. It was Gunya, who traveled on the front seat of the U-Haul truck all the way from Blacksburg, Virginia. He was a grown pup from Tinka, and Tinka started it all. Other dogs were Donar, Joya, Bommel, Kansa, and another Tinka, all German Shepherds, all kept from the breeding line, as we did have litters from which we would select the next generation. All dogs were loved, and all reached the good old age. That is all but Bommel and Donar, which were bought at different times when the breeding line was broken. They too were good dogs, but they were big dogs. The German Shepherd is a large breed. It's a one-family dog. Oh, the kids loved the litters we had and wanted to keep all of them. In the very first litter, we had one gorgeous grayish pup we called Wolf. The kids wanted to keep him, but one dog was enough. I was still in grad school. Peanut butter and good beans with applesauce was the menu. Plenty of fruit, apples and peaches, as I worked in fruit breeding at that time while taking classes. No, Wolf helped pay for books and tuition, as did his brothers and sisters. We've always made sure that the line of the breed had a trusting, friendly character. You have to, because the dog is too large. Bommel was my wife's dog. We bought him at an older age, and he did develop the hip problem, which ultimately was the reason we had to put him down. When Matt, grandson, was just a toddler visiting with his parents, at an unguarded moment, raced on his wobbly legs to the dog, then fell on him while sitting down, Bommel, the dog, growled, snapped at him, and did bite him, breaking the skin. We had to be sure, even though all shots were up to date, that the dog did not have distemper. We had to put the dog down. Not a happy day. Somehow the dogs would sooner or later all tend to drift to me, because I would take them to the farm, to work, or walk the farm. That, for them, was living. I did not take the leashes. No, it was the truck keys that started them. If they did not travel in the cab, they would travel in the pickup bed. And when we would be getting close to the farm, they would start barking. Neighbors said they always knew when I drove by because of the ruckus the dogs made. At the farm, the dogs often would not wait until I lowered the tailgate. They would jump the sides. Oh, they loved it, and so did I. As they ran the farm, they would stay with me. Once they got smart or tired, they would lay on the edge of the field or on my jacket as I mowed the rounds. The cows were a challenge for them. They wanted to herd them. I did not need them to do that, but there were a few times I needed their help. They did help me find the horses when I looked for them. It might have been the horses who saw the dogs and knew I was looking for them, all working together. It is the working together I have been thinking of lately. It is the bond of farmer, rancher, with his dogs or dog that I've been thinking of as I read or hear of the stress farmers are under these days again. I know dogs can communicate with us, and we with them. But if only dogs could talk, they could tell us and warn us when a farmer's stress nears a breaking point. Farmers don't talk easily. They hide their feelings. But I like to think they do talk with their dogs, as well as horses or cattle in general. Maybe they care for a special cow which has given them outstanding calves. But I think dogs are closer and more special as true friends. Years ago, driving by, I watched a farmer step outside the kitchen door and joyfully play with his jumping dog, a German shepherd, while walking to the barn. That dog and farmer knew each other. Can that relationship help with the stress, or when the stress gets really stressful? I hope whoever needs it has a dog he or she trusts. And from the trusted dog, he or she can work up to family or other help. Don't go it alone. Remember you have friends. Some are laying or standing at your feet.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. And as always, thanks for being along with us. Please rejoin us here tomorrow, won't you? Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.